Hey, this is your host, Ike Allred. Welcome to another episode of Create or Die. That's right, folks. And today we've got an announcement to make. That's right. We're official. We have launched CRE8ORDIE.net. Go there right now, check it out, and get you some merch. That's right. Show your support for this podcast by getting a sweet trucker hat or maybe a little skull tumbler. We've even got ping pong balls. That's right. Custom Create or Die ping pong balls and much more. We'll be adding to it often, so check that action out. And you ask, why .net? What kind of cheap, crappy program is this? You're right. The .com was going to be an investment. It was hundreds of dollars, which to some, may not seem like a lot, but to this program, we're new, we're young. But I am happy to announce that since purchasing the .net, I did go ahead and bite the bullet and purchase the .com. It's going to take a while, a couple weeks for that to transfer over, but we'll be rocking and rolling with the .com. So if you're a little gun shy of pulling the trigger on a program that just has a .net URL, I can understand. But we're remedying that, so no more worries. But anyways, the past couple of episodes have been awesome. We've had some great guests. Go check those out. Episode 4 and 5. Hear from some really, really awesome creative talents in their own rights. But for this episode, I decided to just go ahead and ramble again. Going back to our roots from way back. Episodes 1 through 3. That's right. And there's a couple of subjects that I thought might be worth, dancing around, if you will. So one of those came to me via social media. I was scrolling through doing the doom scroll, right, and came across a video from Steven Silver, spelled like Stefan. If you don't know who Steven Silver is, he's a character designer for animation. He's been around for decades. He does some amazing stuff. Most famously, the Kim Possible series from the Disney Channel way back when, and there's been several others. But anyways, he's awesome about posting these, knowledgeable nugs, if you will. And this time around, it was the secret to finding work in any animation studio. He says, if you want to increase your chances of finding work in any animation studio, be this. And he's holding up these little cue cards, and he goes to the next card, and he has the term, be an art chameleon. That's right, one of those lizards that changes color with its environment. So how do we apply that to art? How does he say? He says, show your ability to change styles, and then also have your own style. What's unique about you? And these are things that we've talked about on this program before, and this was exciting for me to see. Later in this episode, I plan to dive into a little bit of my backstory, but to make a long story short, my initial love was animation, and that was what I was going to do. I was going to be a traditional animator, and ended up going the commercial art route, and as a multimedia designer was the term back in the early 2000s. And in my career, I've seen how being able to change my style, whether it be for a different website or different logos or different illustration styles, you name it, has been invaluable. And so it was exciting to hear that that applies to the animation industry as well. And as I thought about that, I'm like, I think it applies to other industries, other design industries, other visual industries. You look at interior design. There are those who just have their go-to style, but then there are also those, and I'm no expert, but I watch my fair share of HGTV or the DIY network, and you see those designers who can, hear from their client what it is that they want and tailor that design to that person, and those individuals tend to be the most successful. At least that's the direction, the spin that we're putting on it in this episode. So how can we as creatives working in this space learn to adapt our style and be that art chameleon? And so I thought about it a little bit. What are things that have helped me? What are things that I've introduced to new designers or illustrators or insert creative title here. And one of those is what I've learned is called master studies. Okay, so essentially, you think about traditional art, painting, you look at the masters, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and so forth. And we can apply that to anything, whether it be website design or concept art or logo design, etc. Let's just pick website design, for example. I love Pinterest. I go there all the time. I have several boards. I've got thousands of pins throughout. One of my biggest boards is probably my website design inspiration board, where I'll just be scrolling through Pinterest and just tag one of those or pin one of those designs to that board. Anyways, there's lots of good inspiring stuff there from all over the web. And so what I've done for myself or for young designers is I'll say, hey, go to this board that I've collected here and just choose one of these designs, and find a button or a banner or a layout and do your best to just straight up copy that. It's not anything you're going to put in your portfolio. It's nothing you're going to claim as your own, because it's not. You're copying it, right? But that exercise of looking at that button and then looking at your blank screen, whether it be Illustrator or Figma or Sketch or Photoshop or whatever, and how in that tool would I recreate that button. And it may be, this was a bigger deal back in the days when buttons were, more askew, morphism, and there were several different layer styles or effects that needed to be created to give it that chrome look or that gel translucent look, whatever. But you learn a lot by stretching your mind and thinking, how would I recreate this? And that leads me to another secret. There's no right way to create any of these things. It's just made up. Someone came up with a process and others have, adopted that process or created their own, and there are obviously objective arguments to say this one is faster or more scalable or whatever, but those things are secondary and they can be learned later. But my argument is these master studies can really help you learn to adapt new styles. Because one thing that will happen a lot of times in working in commercial art is you have a client or you have a stakeholder or multiple a committee, if you will, of stakeholders, and they have different ideas, and one of the best ways for them to communicate their ideas is to point to something that's already been created. And I want to be like Apple. I found this website that I really like. And if you're able to find the elements of that style and adapt it to your own and to the content and to the brand and make it work, that's a valuable thing, like my boy Steven Silver said. In addition to master studies, another thing you can do is limit your tools that you're using when creating something. So initially we talked web design. Let's talk about something else here. So take illustration, for example. In this day and age, we have amazing digital tools. We have AI. We have the ability to essentially push a button and generate ideas. Those are great, and that's something to explore. But let's put a limit on ourselves. Let's get away from the computer for a minute. Go and grab yourself a stack of different colored construction paper and some scissors and some stick glue or Elmer's glue, whatever you want to do, and try to create a layout, a design, an illustration with those rudimentary tools. And there are people out there who specialize at this stuff and create beautiful works of art with these tools and are able to find what is inherently unique about construction paper and working with this medium. They've used shadow and depth to create things that would be really hard in the computer. I could go on, but that's just another example, is limiting your tools. Another way to limit your tools, and this can be done traditionally or on the computer digitally, is if you're going to create a piece of concept art, for example, stick with just one brush size or one brush. Use a hard square brush without any opacity, for example, and have it one size and try to create that vision with what is a limited tool. And you'll find that you can't do things the same way you would, say, with a number 2 pencil, where you can get real fine details. It has to be suggestive. It's broad, strong strokes, and you can find ways to use that same brush and get a little bit more detail, but it's tricky. And those are ways to help differentiate your styles or branch out. And I'm sure there are a million other ways. Limit the number of colors that you use in your design. Define some rules around the design and form language of your piece. This is going to be round, so I need to work with circles and try to avoid any right angles or straight lines in this entire design. Is that possible? And you'll find that it is, and you're going to get some different results, something that you wouldn't normally do. Just now I'm reminded of the fact that trying to describe these visual things on an audio only platform like a podcast is limiting, and I'm having to use words and different descriptors to make this all make sense, and it may not. I'm fully aware of that. But maybe you'll get something out of this. So yeah, be a creative chameleon. Now, I mentioned earlier in the episode that I might share some of my story with you, and so if you don't want to hear it, now's a good time to turn it off, or at least skip to the end where I'll share some final thoughts that may be of some value. But some may find it interesting. Who knows? But yeah, my creative life has been a roller coaster, and I'll tell you, some days I feel like the ideas are flowing and I'm only limited by time and my imagination, and I can, come close to doing no wrong, which is contrasted by other days where I feel like everything I've ever done is crap, and who am I trying to kid? Classic imposter syndrome. And then you've got creative burnout, which there are some times where I feel like there's no way I'm ever going to burn out. I can go 1,000,000 miles an hour. I love this stuff, but life happens, and we do get tired, and we do get beat down by critique after critique that doesn't go our way, which feeds this imposter syndrome where you might compare yourself to others. My background isn't as fancy as someone else's. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't go to a fancy art school. Hell, I didn't even graduate with a bachelor's degree. That's right. Shocker. And that leads me to something that I saw recently from Gary Vaynerchuk. He talks about he talks about burnout. He talks about college and which direction that we decide to choose. For example, he talks about people overthinking our decisions, and he says, you'll never know how the other path would have turned out. So just pick one and do it. Our parents' generations, those degrees, they really meant something. And we want to hold on to that. And that's not to say that people that have these fancy degrees, made a mistake. By no means. They picked that path. I picked another path. And you just have to own it. And you have to do the best with what you were given. And so that leads me into my story. It was 1997. That's right. I graduated high school. I was dead set on becoming a Disney animator, and the only school that I knew of that was teaching animation was the local community college. And so I started there, and let's be honest, I was a B average student, so I wasn't going to make it into one of the fancy universities right out of high school anyways. So I started there at the community college, took some courses, life drawing, intro to design, math for the visual artist, which is one of my favorites because I was not a math guy at all, and illustration classes, 3D animation classes. I was introduced to 3D Studio Max back then, and my mind was completely blown. Anyway, I took a 2-year break to go and serve a mission for my church in California. I returned back home and married my high school sweetheart after just a few months. So, if you know anything about Utah, it's kind of the classic young start to a family type of scenario. And the plan was that eventually we would move to San Francisco and I would start attending the Academy of Art College and get a legit degree. That was the plan. So I was working full time and doing school. And one day on my way to school at 5:30 a.m., after probably staying up until 2 a.m. working on an animation project, I fell asleep at the wheel while exiting the freeway. I was jolted awake by the sound of rough road underneath my tires. And I woke just in time to see that I was heading straight for a cement barricade. I was able to thankfully swerve and just sideswipe the cement barricade and drive to the nearest gas station, where I collected myself, bought some kind of energy drink, and prayed that I could make it back home to get some much needed sleep. And so at that point, I had a wife and our first child, and decided that, school might not be worth dying over. So I decided to embrace that blue collar job of mine, working at the silver refinery, and just be a responsible husband and father and just go to work. We had, the decent insurance, made just enough money to not be completely poor, and that was going to be good enough for now. This was the path that I had chosen. But that creative burning was still inside, and so I thought, what are some other creative careers that I could do that don't require schooling? Because I like I just said, I don't want to die by trying to work full time and go to school. So I thought the comic industry, comic books. I love comic books. At the time, comics were still kind of in their heyday. Comic artists were seen as almost rock stars. I mean, maybe not to the point of the 90s. This was just as, Spider-Man came out, the first Spider-Man. And so comic books were becoming cool again. So I started working on my portfolio and would go to comic conventions. I think the first one was in Chicago, and then over a 2-year period went to 4 or 5 different comic shows where I presented my portfolio and received some good promising feedback. At least one company said, "Oh man, I wish we would have seen you at San Diego Comic-Con last month, because we just hired a guy, but he's not as good as you." And that was before I realized that, that is the comic convention, and that's the one I should have been going to. But anyways, I'd received some other feedback from other studios like Image Comics and Dark Horse, who liked my stuff and gave me assignments to, hey, this is great, but why don't you take this 4-page script and go create a few pages, and here's our contact information, and send it to us. And this wasn't paid work at all. This was just honestly, it felt like a rejection. But in hindsight, like many things, I realized that it was part of the interview process. Had I jumped on those assignments and created some boards and some pages and sent them off, then those companies would have seen, this person is dedicated, they got back to us, or they, they're fast, or we can gauge how much time it took them from the time we initially assigned this to when we received it back. But anyways, long story short, I was deflated, and my wife's patience for this career pursuit had run out. It was at this time when a local company who I had done some sticker illustrations for reached out to me about creating a Flash website. Hey, do you do Flash? That was a big thing at the time. This is back in 2003, 2004 at this point. And I said, yeah, and I had very little experience in it. I had used it in one class back in college. But anyways, I took the job to create this little Flash website, with lots of animation in it, which I totally enjoyed. And I got $500. And that seemed like a lot of money to do something that I loved. And so I thought, wow, okay, maybe there's a business for this. So I decided to bite the bullet and leap right into that entrepreneur life. I started a studio, created a DBA, got a business license, the whole 9 yards, and even rented some studio space in a super rundown, crappy place in Bountiful. And I quickly realized there's a lot more to this running a business thing than just having people randomly call you with work and then life is perfect. I had to wear dozens of hats. I had to be the business development guy. I had to be the money collections person, accounts payable. I had to be the designer. I had to be the illustrator. I had to be the developer. I never felt like I had a weekend. Every moment that I wasn't working on developing new business or creating new work or whatever, I was essentially putting my family at risk. We may not be able to pay rent. We may not be able to buy food. It gets rough when you get down to $7 in your checking account or negative 300 because of... So this wasn't working quite as I envisioned it. So one day I told my wife, I got to figure something out, and I don't know when I'm going to come home, essentially. And so I went to the office at probably midnight and just worked all night on a portfolio website because I needed to get a real job. I needed to not be the one responsible for everything because obviously I didn't know what I was doing. So miraculously, that paid off. I applied to a local design studio with that one night portfolio website built in Flash, of course, and was woke up, at probably 5 p.m. the next day. My wife came and shook me. There's someone on the phone from that studio. And so I had to jump out of bed and do my best not to have a tired voice and talk to the hiring manager at this place and scheduled an interview for the next day. And like I said, miraculously, I landed that job and I felt like I won the lottery. It was awesome. Sure, I was making less than what people can make at McDonald's today, and that company was getting a steal of a bargain. But to go from making nothing, essentially, being far below the poverty line, to making, more than minimum wage, doing something I loved, was pretty awesome. And so that hunger, literal hunger and drive, helped me rise in the ranks at this new studio. Thanks to my failed experience as an entrepreneur, I did create some relationships with some legit businesses that I was able to bring into this new design studio and add value, linchpin myself at this place. And one of these companies was a small software company that I had actually met in California while on my church mission. And one day I was talking to one of the owners of this company, and he mentioned that he had a friend out my way in Utah who was going to reach out about a design position working for this auto auction in Salt Lake City, and told me the salary and said, it's a really low salary. It's only, $48,000 a year or whatever. And that's super low, and I know you probably wouldn't want that. And I was thinking at the time, man, that's actually quite a bit more than what I'm making. And so my response to this business owner was, what I'm really waiting for is for you guys to make me an offer to come out and work for you. And they kind of stopped and said, would you really consider that? And I said, yeah, ever since being in California, I've always wanted to go back, and I know there's a lot of neat things happening in the Bay Area with tech and everything. And so we set up a time for me and my wife to go out there for a couple of days and check things out and talk and anyways, to make a long story short, they offered me the position to start the in-house design wing, if you will, of their 3-person software business. And so the deal was that as long as I can pay for myself, I've got a job. And that sounded like a good thing. I had learned a lot from my experience failing as an entrepreneur, doing my own thing, and then seeing for 2 years how to do it right, or at least a way that worked at this studio where I worked for 2 years. And so started there. There was a little bit of work from existing clients, but I had to put my business development hat back on and go out and drum up some business and propose to the owners of this small business, where to spend some marketing dollars. So we did Google ads, we did radio ads that I wrote myself and had, acted out by the local talk radio station, and created flyers that we hired, some local kid from, one of the guys' neighborhoods to go around and drop off at different businesses, and somehow drummed up a little bit of business to where, after 2 or 3 months, I was legitimately paying for myself. And that was awesome. Around the time I left Utah for California to take on this new job, I decided to start contributing to iStock photos as a vector illustrator. It was an excuse for me to practice my vector illustration skills while maybe someday making a little money. It was slow going. It took a year before I received my first payout from iStock Photo, because you had to sell enough to reach that $100 earnings threshold to where they would send you your first check. Initially, I was just designing, illustrating, whatever, a businesswoman in brown tones, throw that up there. A little cartoon character, okay. A California landscape of rolling hills and oak trees. Nothing, was really catching on. Online poker and poker on TV was a big thing, so I started doing poker-related illustrations and got some traction there, and then found some other niches to focus on. And as I would study the sales and the analytics from this tool, I started to make some real money on the side. So this was great. And like I mentioned, it took a year to get that first $100, and then only a month to get the second $100. It was only a few months later I was making $1,000 a month. Now, that was some real extra spending money. So this was awesome. And so around this time, summer of 2008, I'd been working for this small software company for just over a year, and I received a direct message through the iStock platform. Someone asking if I would create some custom illustrations for their company. And I reached out to this person and said, yeah, would love to. Let me know when we can talk so I can learn more. Well, after talking, I realized that this was a lead from a multi-billion-dollar biotech company. This person wanted me to create illustrations of a team of characters for an internal campaign that her team was doing to help build awareness around the change from Microsoft Office to Google Office, Google Docs, and all of those things. And so this team we were creating was the Google Squad is what they called it. And so I knew from past experience and being in this new role in a foreign land that it's probably a good idea to not take this on by myself on the side. And so I asked this person, hey, is it cool if we do this through my day job? And they were more than happy to do that. And of course, the day job was over the moon about the idea of landing a multi-billion-dollar biotech company as a client after working with small little mom-and-pop customers. So to make a long story short, we were able to hire another designer that took on a lot of the, well, if not all of the web development work, front-end stuff that I had been doing in addition to design, and I focused on design and illustration only. We were then asked by this same contact to follow them into a new role at the company where the company was going to start producing their own iPhone apps at the time. So this was 2009, late 2008, 2009, when Apple had finally opened up the iPhone to third-party developers. And so she asked if we were interested in learning how to do it with her, essentially. There was no one doing this. There was no such thing, and it was awesome to be at the right place at the right time. And so, again, this was a huge boon to the business. We hired more people, designers, developers, and then an amazing thing started to happen. People that we were introduced to at this biotech company left and went to other companies in the Bay Area, other biotechs, other tech companies, and guess what? They needed to bring their secret weapon with them. That was us, our little design/software development company. From 2009 to 2013, we grew from 4 people to 30 people, and it was primarily thanks to this one contact from my tiny little iStock account, and it generated tens of millions of dollars in revenue for this company that I worked with and helped to grow. So from 2014 to 2016, the company had its ups and downs. We would get to a place where that 20 to 30 number of people was hard to maintain, because we would train people up and they would go and take their awesome experience and get an even better job at Google or Facebook or Salesforce. And so come 2016, I had been in California for 9 years and had a handful of kids and decided that it was time for something different. But I didn't want to abandon this company that I had helped to grow and saw so much potential in. But how do we, help it to grow and flourish? And so I thought of Utah, where I was originally from, and how it had been experiencing its own tech boom. So I proposed to the owners of the company that I move back to Utah and start another location of our company there. It was a new pool of talent to draw from. There are several universities here, lots of young college-age people that fit perfectly into our hiring demographic, if you will. And so made the plunge, moved out here, and found that it was a little too awesome here in Utah. It was called Silicon Slopes for a reason, because it was a lot like that place I had just come from, Silicon Valley, where awesome companies like Adobe and Microsoft and other Utah-only companies flourished and were offering amazing benefits and salary that our little company couldn't compete with. So after 2 years of being here in Utah, trying to make a go of starting HQ number 2, I decided to step away and leave the reins of the design part of the company in the hands of my creative number 2 over there. And so I felt good knowing that this company was in a good place, and I was free to start anew after being at the same company for 11 years. And that's when I started at my first in-house company, MX, the medium-sized fintech company that I've alluded to in previous episodes. I felt like joining MX was another huge step in my career, helping to legitimize myself, if you will, back to these feelings of imposter syndrome and inadequacy. Tell you what, people at MX seem so sharp and so with it, and they had this amazing drive for the mission that was absolutely intoxicating. And it was like drinking from a fire hose, trying to learn everything I could about the financial industry, fintechs, how they fit into this world of banks and credit unions. And it's been amazing. I've been here for nearly 5 years, seen a lot of growth, a lot of change, been through a few CEOs, seen executives come and go, and I continue to learn and grow. And that is where we're at. And here I am, starting this podcast, pursuing other creative outlets, trying to find that next challenge. And rather than jumping ship from what has been the most amazing job I've ever had, I'm looking for these creative challenges in other ways, like this podcast, like my ebook that will soon be released, where I talk more about my art stock side hustle. So stay tuned. I'm sure I'll make mention of that when it's ready and available on this podcast in a future episode. Anyways, I hope that this exercise and me sharing my creative journey, my story, as far as my professional life is concerned, doesn't sound self-serving, but rather helps you to see that there are paths that aren't traditional that one can take and still make a living doing what you love, creating in my case. So thanks again for taking the time to listen to another episode of this little podcast. And if you enjoy it and want to show your support, you know what to do. Tell your friends, tell your coworkers, and tell your family to listen and subscribe. And like I mentioned at the start of the program, there's a new way you can show your support. Visit CRE8 and get you some merch. That's right. Keep on creating, my friends. Until next time, this is your live-in male nanny in charge of your days and your nights, and your wrongs and your rights. Like I'm part of your family. I can charge. Allred. Signing off. Create or die.